we're going to hopefully have a gather and create day. If you call it a craft day, some ladies that aren't crafty think, I can't go. So Sue's had the bright idea. We love it. We're going to gather. You can come and just chat. We don't care. And if you want to create, you can create too. So we'll have details to follow. And then save the date for our women's Christmas dinner on Tuesday, December 6th. So just a couple things to keep in your memory. And last night I spent a long time, because I had computer issues, because I'm not real IT sometimes, had to switch computers, had to retype. I wrote this beautiful long intro for my dear friend with a couple fun stories that she doesn't know about in it. And now we're running a little behind the schedule, so I think I'm going to cut it. I knew she'd like that. Well, it was a really good story on Mike, Connie, so I'll share it later. I told his mom, I got a good one on Mike. But Connie, if you'd like to come up, I'd love to introduce Connie Adnoff to you, a friend for, what did we decide, Connie, about 35 years? Because we're only 45. We'll go with that. We've been friends for a long time. Actually, I knew her husband before they were together, before Larry and I were together. Fast forward some years, caught up with Mike and Connie, and we both had families and children and ran into each other on vacation together with our children. We've had some fun times over the years.
Yes.
One thing I can tell you about Connie is Connie brings the fun.
No.
Connie is a hoot. She will laugh with you. She will cry with you. But what's most attractive to me about Connie, even though she's a lot of fun, she likes to walk and bike ride and do all those things that I love. She loves Jesus so much. And years ago, she and Mike shared, and she said, when they went through some really rough loss, where else would we go but to Jesus? And that has never left my mind, that where else would she go but to Jesus? So I think it's her deep love of Jesus that's always kept us connected, even though we have fun when we do get together. So anyways, please welcome Connie Adnoff, dear sister, friend in the Lord. She promises she won't hate me for asking her to do this. She said yes, and I was like, wow, really? Yes, thank you.
I don't need that thing. Am I good? Ooh, yeah, there she is. Whew. Okay, I don't think I need these guys anymore. Hi, guys. First of all, I have to say thank you for all of the prayers. I can't, oh, here we go. I'm not going to last very long, you know. All of the prayers, I have felt them. This crowd here is just amazing. This is a very special place. And my dear friends that are here from high school days, parts of my family that are here, little reunion, kind of. But I'm really humbled. I think I'm thankful for this opportunity. And I trust that God's Spirit will use it. A couple of disclaimers. You're not supposed to do that when you're speaking, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have to read it. I'm going to have to read everything I say because I cannot pull words out of the air anymore. The bandwidth is done. The computer files are full, and I need to delete some things, and I don't know what to delete. So it's written, and I'm going to read it. That's the way it is. Now, another disclaimer. This thing is about 50 minutes long if I go at a good clip. I know we girls love details, and every time we tell our husbands or friends a story, it's every single little detail. Used to drive my husband nuts because he'd go, "Are we going to get to a point anywhere here soon?" You know? And so I don't have to deal with that tonight. So it's going to be what it's going to be. But if you need to leave, fine. You do whatever you need to do to be comfortable, okay? You're allowed. I'll be all right, and I'll try not to get distracted. Disclaimer number 3, well, I kind of already said it. I might cry, and that's okay, because that's what I do. And so don't worry. I'll revive, or not. Somebody else can come up and read this thing. Okay, here we go. Let's put that there. My maiden name was Connie Brown, and we Browns always had a difficult time saying goodbye at any type of family, friend, or church gathering. It would seriously take a minimum of 30 to 60 minutes for a final chat and hug with each dear soul just to get out the door. Right? Am I right? My sister-in-law knows this. And we were always the last to leave. Oh, here are some photos I forgot to show you. Where's your vacation going to be again? Oh, your cake was wonderful. Do you happen to have that recipe nearby? Well, in fact, as far back as I can remember, whenever we were leaving extended family gatherings, all our able-bodied relatives would erupt into a raucous game of what we called last tag, a competition between our families playing tag with each other in the middle of the street while running to our cars. Sometimes we'd even tag each other out through the car windows as our families would be speeding away to go home. Not only were there casualties, but it further extended the time it took to leave. So when I married Mike Adnoff, the man I could not live without, it was he who would abruptly declare at any gathering that it was time to leave, immediately walk out the door, get all 4 kids in the car, and start the engine. Meanwhile, I'd just be starting the final chats and hugs. As years went by, he learned to give me a 15-minute warning. That didn't help. After almost 40 years as Connie Adnoff, I'm still terrible at saying a clean and concise goodbye. Well, a little over a year and a half ago, here we go, I had to say a final goodbye to my dear husband, Michael. And it wasn't how I expected it would be. But first, I have to back up several decades. I grew up in a wonderful family. My brother was 12 years and 1 day older than me. How they pulled that off, I don't know. And he taught me everything I hold dear to this day: reading books, playing card games, how to throw a football properly, a love for photography, studying maps, knowing every player's name in the Dodgers' 1962 lineup, very important things like that. We attended a great Bible-teaching Baptist church in Montebello that was just a few blocks from our house, and my family was there every time the doors were open, or even when the doors were locked, because my dad had all the keys. I loved our church and our church family. There were really good people that were deeply involved in each other's lives, just as there are here at Seaside. It reminds me a lot of that. I distinctly remember at age 3, running out the front door of our house to play with the neighborhood kids when I abruptly stopped and realized that I need to ask Jesus into my heart so that I can go to heaven. I did just that, told Jesus thank you, and then continued to run outside to play. Okay, so it was a start of a journey, and I was simply working with what I believed to be true. I can remember all my Sunday school teachers' names, and it was a particular thrill for me to earn a white zippered Bible in 2nd grade for memorizing Bible passages like Psalm 100 and John 1. The next few years, my best friends and I earned our way to summer camp for all the verses we learned. I started singing in the children's choir in 3rd grade, and that was the beginning of my involvement with music. One of my partners in there is here. My poor parents had to drive me around for piano lessons, flute lessons, and choir practices, and then attend every single concert, recital, and church service throughout my years at Whittier Christian High School, Azusa Pacific University, and beyond. I could confidently belt out songs of joy and assurance of God's great love for me. And I had grown in my relationship with Jesus since my first steps with him as a 3-year-old. But all those songs and scripture verses remained theory and were not yet road tested. I came really close to marrying my longtime boyfriend, but we decided, thank God, to take a break from each other for a while. The very next day, Mike Adnoff and I encountered each other at a casual high school reunion picnic. Now, we had only sort of spoken to each other maybe once in all our 4 years at school together. Why? Because he was too cool for words and way too foxy for a nerdy geek like me. But here we were actually talking to each other. And we discovered that we both happened to be living in our own parents' little beach houses in Newport. We started hanging out, enjoying all our favorite recreational activities around our beloved beach town, and it was a delightful whirlwind of friendship that caught us both by surprise. I was teaching English at Newport Christian High School at the time, now called Pacifica Christian, and my students knew something was up with Miss Brown. They kept trying to guess who it was because flowers would frequently arrive in my classroom from the mysterious FTD. One of our many memorable dates together was an evening bike ride with Mike down the boardwalk to the Wedge. We just happened to find a stray picnic basket filled with dinner, music, flowers, and a candle. And it was hidden in the rocks of the jetty. Boy, that guy knew how to get my attention, and I was falling fast. It wasn't long before we were engaged and a glorious wedding was planned. Mike's father tried to warn me at our wedding's rehearsal dinner in front of God and everybody about how Mike was. And he began to list all the passionate projects his son had pursued so far. He immersed himself in the world of surfing. He immersed himself in Bible study after meeting Jesus at age 20. He immersed himself in learning how to play guitar so he could lead worship. He immersed himself in a variety of junior high youth ministries, Big Calvary and other places. And he started taking kids on weekend surf trips anywhere from Hollister's Ranch to Baja, Mexico. My soon-to-be father-in-law suggested that I was Mike's current pursuit du jour, and that I probably should prepare myself to encounter a wild ride. I was flabbergasted at the time, but guess what? He was so right. Even on our fairy tale honeymoon to Fiji, he was ready to leave after just a few days because he was so excited to get back to Whittier so we could start working on our little fixer-upper cottage. That was one of the very few times in our marriage when I said, absolutely not. Needless to say, overhauling properties ended up being another lifelong pursuit for him. No matter where we were, he'd start staring all around the room. Our family quickly learned he wasn't just bored with our conversation, he was completely remodeling the joint in his head. Well, we never knew what hit us, but it wasn't long before we had 3 babies in 2.5 years. Line them all up for diaper changes, line them all up for food, line them all up for nap time, line them all up for bed at 7:30, including us parents. I thought I was going crazy, and I'm sure I was. When my dear husband would attempt to be amorous, I once again said, absolutely not. Well, that doesn't go over very well now, does it? But something had to be done. The Bible tells us our days are numbered, and that the very hairs on our head are numbered too. Now, I'm not going to build a theology around the hair thing because who's counting all those little gray hairs that keep falling out of my head right now? But God is so precise in every way. He functions outside of time and in eternity, but somehow steps into our finite world to make pinpoint moves that rock our finite world, even throughout what seem to be random events of each day. Have you noticed that? For example, At age 30, Mike managed to live through what must have been months or even years of extremely high blood pressure, and we were clueless. We had just had our third baby. Mike was spending inordinate amounts of time learning computer systems so that he could modernize his dad's company. He was still running weekend surf trips for local youth. Sure, he was tired and stressed. We all were. But his body began to violently shut down. After trips to every kind of doctor and nutritionist who couldn't figure out what was wrong, we learned from a chiropractor that his blood pressure was 250 over 150 and that we needed to get him to the ER immediately. We didn't even understand what 250 over 150 meant. I know it now. I'll never forget the way the ICU doctor yelled at me for being so irresponsible. But he also couldn't figure out why Mike was still alive. In fact, tests showed that he should have died from a massive stroke or blood poisoning long before. His days were numbered, that's why. The actual diagnosis? Kidney failure, both of them. Surgery was scheduled for a shunt to be placed inside his left forearm to facilitate dialysis by the end of the week. Meanwhile, I was still trying to attend to our 3 little ones at home, including my nursing 1-month-old Valerie. There were 2 cribs in our second bedroom, one for Katie, 2.5, and one for Russell, 1.5, plus a porta crib in our dining room for Valerie. The morning of Mike's surgery, the 2 older kids were still asleep, so I quietly picked up Valerie from her porta crib and went into the kitchen to make some phone calls to friends, since I hadn't had a chance to tell anyone about what had happened to Mike, and we needed prayer. While talking with dear friends in Chino, our world in Whittier began to literally fall apart. It was the 6.3 Whittier Narrows earthquake of 1987, and we were 1 block from the fault line. The phone went dead. Katie and Russell were crying. I was trying to stagger into their room with Valerie to get them out of there. The 4 of us huddled in a doorway. All I could think was, I've got to hold it together. Because we had baby-proofed the house, none of the cupboards spilled their contents, but the brick fireplace and chimney crashed into our living room, leaving a gaping hole. After the endless shaking stopped, I also noticed the big window air conditioning unit in the dining room had fallen directly into Valerie's porta crib. If I hadn't picked her up just minutes before, she would have been crushed. Her days were numbered. I had no way to see if Mike was okay at the hospital or if he'd even had his surgery or what, and he had no way to see if we were okay at home. All the phone lines were dead. A contractor from our church that we had used just a few months earlier took it upon himself to drive over to our house, all on his own, to inspect the foundation for damage. Our property sloped pretty severely from front to back, so the rear portion of our 1913 house sat on a 12-foot high single brick foundation. It was pretty wobbly before the earthquake, and it was really wobbly after the earthquake. I was told that we needed to get out of there immediately, as the entire house had shifted, and the simple wooden-backed stairway was the only thing keeping the whole house from crashing down. While I carefully tiptoed around the house to pack up the kids so we could stay with Mike's folks, I looked out the window and saw 10 men covered from head to toe, carrying tools, heavy beams, concrete pilings, all kinds of equipment down our driveway. And then, I'll never forget this sight. They gathered in a circle, held hands, and prayed before they all disappeared underneath our house to temporarily shore up the foundation, even though multiple aftershocks were still happening. Those men risked their lives for our family, and we didn't even know them. Needless to say, some long-lasting friendships quickly developed. Once our little family was reunited with their daddy back home, a new routine began with new medications, new diet restrictions, and Mike needing dialysis 4 hours, 3 times a week, all while still working full-time. After one of his dialysis treatments, Mike came home as usual, but began to feel numb in his extremities. The paralysis gradually overtook the rest of his body to the point where he could no longer move or even speak. Once again, we were clueless. I decided in the middle of the night to drag him across the floor and into the living room so I could call an ambulance and then call Mike's parents to come stay with the babies. The paramedics thought he was simply drunk. Well, that's when Mike's folks and I started yelling at them to get moving. I didn't know what was going on, but he certainly wasn't drunk. Well, when they finally got Mike to the hospital, he was just a few minutes away from flatlining. It turned out to be potassium poisoning due to an error by the dialysis unit technicians. Thankfully, the ER doctors were able to reverse it quickly once they knew what they were dealing with. Mike's days were still numbered. Soon after, Mike's new doctor and dialysis director put his name on the National Registry for a kidney transplant. There were no motorcycle helmet laws in 1988, and we soon learned motorcycle accidents were the top producer of available organs for transplants. In fact, doctors called them donor cycles. Better not have any out there, girls. The typical waiting period for a viable organ match at that time was around 9 months. We decided we better use the time to permanently repair the earthquake damage to our cottage and then find another home with more space for our growing troops. We found another fixer-upper and had started to spruce it up a bit before moving in. But the back and forth circus between both those homes was wearing very thin. So we moved just our beds and a few clothes to the new house so we could put the kids to bed and then keep on working late into the night. Well, wouldn't you know it, the very next morning, Mike got the call to get over to UCI Medical Center as quickly as possible. They had found a match. He had been on dialysis for exactly 9 months. A kidney from a motorcycle accident victim in LA was being prepared for transport. Mike left first while I made all the SOS phone calls for help with the kids, helped to figure out how to get the rest of our belongings, including furniture and appliances, from the old house to the new house, help with the remaining rooms that still needed painting, help with getting food into the house, on and on and on. Just a sidebar here for a minute. Mike and I had desperately hoped to live in Newport Beach once we were married. He had never forgiven his parents for moving away from Newport to live in Whittier when he was a kid. But nothing worked out for us, no matter how hard we tried. And inch by inch, mile by mile, we ended up in Whittier, of all places. We were so disappointed at the time, but oh my goodness, did God know what he was doing or what? We were so very grateful that both sets of our parents were just a phone call away to help us in our many times of need. Likewise, our parents' friends, our extended family, and our earthquake construction heroes, they became a beehive of activity at both homes with paintbrushes and flatbed trucks, furniture dollies, food, diapers, more that I can't even remember now. How could we ever thank them? Okay. Back to the cliffhanger. I left our kids in good hands and drove like a crazy woman to UCI Medical Center. And as I was just approaching the off-ramp from the 5 freeway, I saw the Life Flight helicopter cross my path overhead and make a landing on a portion of the hospital parking lot. Immediately, a courier jumped out, ran into the building with a red 6-pack Igloo cooler. Time was of the essence. I was sobbing as I knew that had to be the life-saving kidney for my Michael. I also knew there was another family in Los Angeles grieving for the tragic loss of their loved one. The surgery was a success, but there was no evidence the kidney was functioning. In other words, Mike wasn't peeing, and there wasn't absolutely anything he could do about that. This went on for 3 weeks. Mike watched while other happy transplants patients were sent home. Conversely, he watched while other transplant patients whose kidney had failed, had rejected, they were also sent home. At some point during those weeks of agonizing limbo and depression, he read a book called You Gotta Keep Dancing that he adopted as his life's motto. Does that sound familiar to anybody? John just happened to speak about that last month. Unbelievable. By the way, I never read that book, and that was Mike's second Bible. I just ordered it this week after all these years. Then and there, he decided that instead of lying around in that hospital bed, he'd at least get his blood circulating as much as possible. I mean, couldn't hurt, right? He started marching around the floor of his wing, pushing his IV pole. Then he tackled the floor above, the floor below, all 5 floors, the stairways, and eventually out into the vast parking lot in his striped bathrobe, still pushing his IV pole. On his first foray outside, the security dudes apprehended him, thinking he was a runaway from the psych ward. But eventually, everyone got to know the guy walking in the striped bathrobe, and they were rooting for him. I don't remember much of the daily drive back and forth to the hospital, but on occasion, I'd bring the 3 kiddos to see their daddy. Of course, they loved all the push buttons and blowing up the latex balloons or the gloves like balloons, right? And then the big news was splashed all over our house. Daddy went pee-pee at the hospital! You know, little kids are all about those things. Mike arrived home in better shape than he had been in a long time after all that hiking. Just in time, because there was a downpour that very night, and we got a call in the middle of the night from a neighbor next to our old house that the tarp covering the open areas where our chimney and fireplace used to be had blown away. So who dashed over there, fresh out of the hospital, and climbed onto the roof to replace the tarp in the pouring rain, all by himself? Mike Adnoff, of course. Unbelievable. But to be honest, it must have felt really good for him to be normal again. We were overflowing with gratitude and relief to God, to our family, and to our friends for walking a rough road with us. We decided to throw a big Thanksgiving bash in our backyard. We had learned some big lessons over the last year: how to humble ourselves to ask for help, and then to graciously receive that help. I mean, how could we ever pay back the many A-positive blood donors within our family and friend group who faithfully donated much-needed blood to Mike every month during his 9 months of dialysis? And there were so many episodes of having to trust God's timing, too, during this time. We also learned the tremendous value of a community. Mike revved up the weekend youth surf trips again by putting flyers in local surf shops, and he got in touch with some great longtime friends to help out. The qualifications were love surfing, love serving, have a heart for kids, a passion to share Jesus, cooking helps, and a commitment to monthly weekend trips. Mike was at it again. He was dancing, and life was good. Our new home became the hub of many family activities, church gatherings, and meals. It felt so good to be givers again and not on the perpetual receiving end. I remember telling a friend I was so relieved that whole awful chapter was over. Well, that notoriously blunt friend suggested all of that might have been for the preparation of our faith for an even bigger event ahead. Not what I wanted to hear. A little over a year later, our family was enjoying an extra special day that started at church in the morning, followed by a summer pool party at Mike's folks' house. The kids had such a good time, especially Valerie, who was having a ball playing with her grandpa and daddy in the jacuzzi that was only partially heated so the kids could enjoy it all day. As evening approached, we were getting things ready for dinner on the patio. And I decided I would help in the kitchen for the first time in years, since I was usually tending to a baby. I alerted the menfolk that I was going inside, and they were to be in charge of the kiddos outside. There was a lot of commotion with all of us going in and out to set up dinner outside by the pool. At some point, I heard somebody ask, "Where's Valerie?" Katie and Russell were coloring on the patio. They hadn't seen her. There was a fish pond in the backyard. I ran back to check that area. Nothing. Everyone was scrambling. And then I heard it, a cry of anguish from my father-in-law. I grabbed Katie and Russell so we could go inside the house, and I watched the scene unfold outside through a window. Valerie was found back in the jacuzzi. Mike began CPR while we called 911. The rest is a blur. At the ER, we were told Valerie still had a heartbeat, but they weren't certain about brain activity. She needed to be airlifted to Long Beach Memorial. And as we were watching the aircraft take off, it wasn't lost on me. The very same Life Flight helicopter that had delivered Mike's kidney to UCI just the year before was now carrying our daughter in an attempt to save her life. We were told to go home and try to sleep. How's that even possible? Her empty crib at home, with only her beloved blankies in it, was the slap of reality that caused me to collapse on the floor and weep. The next morning, we dashed to Long Beach and were told that there was little to no brainwave activity, that we would need to make some tough decisions, and did we know about the organ donor program? Surreal. The other decision would be about life support, which could end up with an indeterminate outcome. As it turned out, we didn't have to go down that path because Valerie Jane's little heart stopped beating on its own. Her number of days on earth ended on July 24th, 1989, just 2 weeks before turning 2. She would have been 35 years old this month. In retrospect, from the time Valerie was 1 month old, we all realized she was extra special. She was an easy baby who happily could be held or fed by anyone. Thank goodness, since so many others had to care for her while I was away visiting Mike in the hospital or managing the earthquake repair projects. Throughout that year of trauma, Katie and Russell had kept the much-needed joyful energy rolling in our home, but it was Valerie who was a huge comfort to me. When I picked her up from the church nursery that last time, all the nursery workers had gathered around the door to tell me that she had been so much fun for them and that they didn't want me to take her home. Stories like that came pouring in about our daughter, who had made such an impact on others during her short life. Her days were indeed numbered. And it also began to dawn on me that I didn't get to say goodbye to my little girl. Although I honestly don't know how I could have possibly done so anyway. In the days and weeks ahead, we could really feel God's nearness to us like I had never experienced before. Friends and family surrounded us too. I also decided I could not allow myself to curl up in the fetal position and grieve like I may have wanted to. Because what message would that give to Katie and Russell about our hope in Jesus and his defeat of death? Did I really believe everything we had taught them? And even though Mike and I went to counseling a time or two, I learned early on that we were definitely not grieving the same way, which is quite normal. We worked hard to prevent that from becoming a wedge between us, but it oftentimes did. He immediately embarked on a major remodel of our home. If he couldn't fix our loss, he was going to do something that he could fix. Likewise, I strongly felt that I didn't want our loss of Valerie to be the final chapter for our family having children, especially for Katie and Russell's sake. Ever since my absolutely not declaration after Valerie's birth, dear Michael had attempted to have a vasectomy 3 different times, but every single appointment had to be canceled at the last minute due to some random medical emergency. The last of those 3 appointments had been originally scheduled for what turned out to be the very day Valerie died. It was one of the most vivid coincidences of divine intervention I'd ever witnessed. I was so relieved I hadn't gotten my way. In my horrific grief, God had preserved the potential for the gift of life in our family. And there's one of them right there. But as weeks passed, the grief of our loss began to overwhelm me, and I shook my fist at God for many years, wondering if I could ever trust him again. How could he have done this to us? I figured, well, he's God, isn't he? He'll just have to deal with my rage. He at least owes me that. I wanted to be in control again. It took a long time to get reacquainted with my Creator and meet him on his terms, not mine. To press in and truly believe that he is who he says he is, in spite of the circumstances all around us. Because at some point, all the alternatives seemed utterly absurd, especially the part about me being in charge. In the meantime, our daughters Andrea and then Chrissy were born within the span of 2.5 years. There was a miscarriage in between them, however. They each brought tremendous joy and healing to our entire family. What a gift. But oh my, what a busy, crazy life with 4 young children to help navigate. Survival mode, I called it. Even though Mike was an amazing and engaged daddy-o for our kids, I'd still get so angry and frustrated as it seemed he would expend all of his precious energy out there at work, or on weekend surf ministry trips, or house projects, or council meetings, and then collapse exhausted when he came home or while on our own family vacations. I remember older ladies watching me with my kids in the grocery store checkout line, telling me with misty eyes that these were the golden years with my young ones, and to appreciate every minute with them. Yeah, right. Well, now I'm one of those gray-haired ladies looking on with misty eyes. At least I honestly remember just how hard those days were. But they were golden. It was around this time that another mom with young children that I'd only met once knocked on my front door and asked if I'd like to do life with her. I must have looked dumbfounded and shrugged my shoulders. Do life? What did that mean? Well, it ultimately meant, let's do what we're already doing with our kids, but let's do it together when possible. Making lunches, park days, mommy and me class, changing diapers, prayer times, mini vacations, day excursions, and ultimately, great memories for our kids and ourselves. Other moms joined us along the way, and we're all lifelong friends. I highly recommend it. It also took the heat off our busy husbands who were also overwhelmed and in survival mode. If you don't have precious women in your life, no matter what age you are, go knock on a door. Okay, or text. We need each other, ladies, right? In 1995, during one of our many family vacations to Newport Beach, Mike determined he never wanted to go back to Whittier again. It was time to move back to our beloved beach and avoid anything east of Pacific Coast Highway as much as possible. New home, new school, new friends, new church, new beginning. Doing life on a bicycle or on foot was a great new lifestyle for us all. Living on a postage stamp-sized property with no yard and barely any parking was an adjustment, but hey, the beach was our playground. We loved it. It wasn't long, though, when Mike found out his 10-year-old kidney was beginning to fail. By this time, motorcycle helmet laws had been put into place, and the average wait for an organ was no longer 9 months, but 9 years. A live donor was the ideal solution, but that's a donation on a whole other level. Both the potential donor and Mike had to be in tip-top shape to qualify, not to mention a good match. But between his return to dialysis and the toxic medications he had had to take for 10 years to keep his kidney alive, Mike was a mess. He had to be hospitalized at Cedars-Sinai in LA several times to remove significant amounts of skin cancer and apply skin grafts, all of which is a medication side effect. An emergency bowel rupture and colostomy, also due to harsh medications. And there was a mysterious chronic bladder infection, back and forth from Newport to West LA every day. In one famous episode, however, Mike was released to go home from the hospital when it was determined that he would have to stay another 2 weeks for a complicated surgery to remove the first transplanted kidney in case it was the source of that infection. Mike was furious. He hated hospitals. He hated hospital food. Oh yeah, and he never played by the rules. He got out of bed. He got dressed. He shoved all of his ID bracelets and IV tubing inside his jacket sleeve and told me we were going to Benihana's for dinner. Okay. His nurse saw us and must have sensed not to mess with this guy. She simply said, "I know nothing, don't get caught, and you'd better be back in bed by 9 o'clock. God bless her. With hearts pounding and a few smothered giggles, we escaped down the hall to the elevator, to our car. I drove us to Benihana's on La Cienega Boulevard for a good hot meal. It gave him great pleasure to pull that off, but even more so, to call his kids and have them try to guess where he was. He beat the system for just one evening. I think the man basically needed some semblance of control back in his life before he had to climb back into his hospital bed. After a difficult year of great bodily and emotional deterioration, Mike received a live kidney donation from his younger sister, Karen, in September of 2000. Their parents and siblings were doubly anxious, to say the least. It was an extraordinary gift and immediate miracle in every way. However, Karen had a much harder journey for recovery as a donor than Mike did as a recipient. In just 2 days, Mike was back in his beloved Newport, happily riding a bike down the boardwalk. Well, the next decade whizzed by as we tried our best to facilitate our 4 kids and their variety of interests, help them develop their passions and gifts, and sneak in some precious family time. It was all about water polo and theater and surfing and art and tennis and golf, lacrosse, horseback riding, boating, fishing, music, and eventually dating and driver's licenses and college, even a wedding. I was definitely in the sandwich years as my parents were aging and needed to be moved closer to us after 60 plus years in their Montebello home. Now, I loved them dearly, but they were both Depression-era accumulators, to say the least. That emotional and labor-intensive endeavor, right, ran me and my dear brother into the ground. The brilliant takeaway: get rid of your stuff now, ladies. I just have to put that into this thing, okay? Do yourself a favor, and your kids. Mike decided to switch careers, real spiritual, huh? Mike decided to switch careers and try his hand at flipping houses, which ultimately led us to a new home of our own. At the same time, he grabbed an opportunity to expand our surf ministry to Kauai, which entailed purchasing a couple of properties, remodeling them, and totally outfitting them with everything needed to facilitate an unforgettable experience for young teens. He shipped over boats, trucks, vans, trailers, appliances, furniture, surf gear, fishing gear, paddle boards, bunk beds, gym lockers, anything he could get his hands on. Kids from the mainland joined local island kids for challenging experiences laced with discipline, Bible studies, fun, work projects, great surf, and hopefully life-changing lessons. Only God knows the fruit that came from those many camps. And then the financial bust of 2008-2009 happened. We lost everything. The Kauai properties, gone. The island surf ministry, gone. Our local income property, gone. Even our own home was on the chopping block. And we, now in our 50s, had to reinvent ourselves and figure out a way to make a living all over again. What did we know how to do and do well? Well, our family always had a little side hustle managing a duplex we owned, along with both our parents' personal beach houses, as vacation rentals. Laundry for the units was constantly piled up on our dining room table, and our kids had all grown up cleaning every square inch of those rentals, including the toilets. We'd hire their friends and our own friends to help us in the summer. We were a mean cleaning machine with lots of crazy experience. So what if we tried to manage properties that were owned by other people? Well, Mike, the visionary risk taker who had to keep dancing, was off and running again. Only this time, the stakes were high. We had to sell our house to get started, and there was no backup plan. I remember sitting in our van, the two of us, along with our son, who had agreed to join us, praying together for God's go or no go, as they say at NASA, just before launching a 3,000-ton rocket. And that's about what it felt like. After a lot of scratching, clawing, and working 18-hour days or more, 7 days a week, we began to see growth. Mike was in his glory. He loved offering work opportunities for people in need to use their gifts or discover their potential, while providing income for them and much needed help for us. His heart was still wired to come alongside young teens to encourage and inspire them. Our little company had plenty of options for them too. It was more like a ministry and less like a corporation, which was great and all, but we still had kids at home who needed me, whether they thought so or not, along with a revolving door of friends and family in need of housing who lived with us for various lengths of time. Plus, my parents were failing and needed me. Grandkids were being born too. I was so torn and exhausted, but I had to carry my weight in this business as well. After all, I had been tremendously blessed to not have to work away from home during the majority of the years we were raising kids. And Mike and I, we made a great team, if I may say so myself. Well, Mike got so immersed in building our company that he was no longer taking the time to surf, to exercise, or to see doctors. He kept covering up a rough patch on his scalp, and he'd constantly wear his favorite baseball caps, saying it was under control. By the time doctors were consulted and scans were run, the cancer had spread, and it was too late for treatments to completely arrest it. We'd only be chasing it. In addition, doctors didn't want to jeopardize his sister's transplanted kidney that was functioning better than ever after 20 years. It was a conundrum we called Sophie's choice. As a result, they were limited with the types of treatments they could use, and immunotherapy for him was out of the question anyway. His immune system had been suppressed by meds for 33 years. Early on, each of the many doctors involved in Mike's care would pull me aside and say, "You know, you came to us way too late." But none of them ever said that to Mike directly. I guess they felt he needed to focus on staying positive or something. Instead of, you gotta keep dancing, Mike ramped up his mantra to, I'm gonna keep fighting. He fought through several extreme and disfiguring surgeries, radiation, chemo, feeding tube, all while still working full time. Throughout his 33 years of chronic illness, he refused to act or be identified as the sick guy. Throughout his 33 years of chronic illness, I was his private nurse, chauffeur, medical advocate, and general protector. My pathetic joke was, if I'd wanted to be a nurse, I would have gone to school to be a nurse. But I didn't. Well, I think I could have probably earned the equivalent of some sort of medical degree over the years. But this current, intense, and frightening balancing act I was performing with Mike's cancer, our company, and an uncertain future finally came crashing down on me. I found myself at Hoag Hospital having a heart attack just before the new year of 2020. Our favorite year, huh? Me, the caregiver in the hospital. Looking back, I can only explain it as a godsend because that alarming episode gave me official permission to take care of myself going forward. My husband still needed my care, of course, but I needed to figure out how to do that safely. Oh, and my days were numbered too. The second and final year of Mike's illness took place during the height of the COVID pandemic and the shutdown. This turned out to actually be a huge blessing. We simply didn't pay attention to it because we couldn't. We had bigger fish to fry. But an even greater blessing was, because of COVID, our whole family, our 4 kids, their spouses, their children, and their pets, were able to leave their homes far and wide and stay all together in one of our rentals near our house for 3 whole months. Hooray for remote work! Hooray for homeschooling! Talk about unprecedented. In a normal world, their time with us would have been limited to maybe a weekend or 2 at best. Instead, we got to do life all together during Mike's last months. Our kids absolutely blew me away. While Russell held the fort down at our company, Katie, Andrea, Christian, and their spouses held daily morning meetings to coordinate meals, Zoom work schedules, dog walking, grocery shopping, cooking, helping me with their dad's care, or sending out updates to friends and family. Our messy back patio was cleared out and set up for al fresco meals together, including party lights and heaters. Mike's mom was able to join us several times, which was a wonderful bonus. And she's here tonight. It gets me. I'm sorry. I love you. She had just lost her husband of 66 years, Mike's dad, the year before. On occasion, we all wheeled Mike down to enjoy some time all together on his beloved beach. These were incredibly precious times that none of us will ever forget. A special, very personal gift to me to have our whole family around us during this painful chapter. And all because of COVID shutdowns. Only God could pull that off. I'm serious. But the part that none of us understands to this day is that whenever Mike, in his last days, was asked if there was anything important or meaningful he wanted to share with us or his grandkids, he would scoff and ask if we were writing his obituary already. If there was an answer, it was always, I'm going to keep fighting. This was a man who was forever imparting wisdom and truth to anyone who would listen, giving his all for his family and for the sake of the gospel of Christ and the word of God since he was 20. Was it the heavy pain meds? Had the cancer spread to his brain? Was it fear? Was it denial? Was it all the painful and disappointing losses he often referenced as a major theme in his life? Did he think God had turned his back on him for the final time? All I know, it wasn't at all what I expected at the end of such a prolific, influential life. Only God knows. But as you can see, I'm still struggling with this one. Michael was removed from this earth on December 7th, 2020, and I say removed because he went out kicking and yelling. No final words of love, no visions of angels leading Michael to his heavenly home, no peaceful countenance, just a desperate yell for help, and then silence. It was the first and only time he was not ready to say goodbye. So why is my story filled with so much of Mike's story? It's because 40 years ago I decided to hitch my wagon to his star. I loved him. He was the most remarkable man I'd ever met. He was the guy who would take a doctor's note to the kids' school office, signed by Dr. Barracuda, to officially pull them from class and surprise them with a day of fishing instead of school. And that was him in a nutshell. He pulled stunts like that quite often, just to delight his family. And even though we were both the exact same height, which was perfect for hugging and kissing, by the way, he was bigger than life. Oh yes, he was the man I couldn't live without. We were a formidable team together, and now that he's gone, I'm having to learn how to unhitch my wagon and fly solo. This is where I am right now. When most of the complicated legalities after Mike's death were under control, like taxes, insurance, banking, estate attorneys, officially putting our business into Russell's capable hands, I began, for the first time in my life, to feel afraid of the unknowns that were looming ahead of me. Now what do I do? By the way, who am I? I'm no longer a wife. My kids are all grown and married. Even my parents are gone now, and I'm definitely not who I was in 1982. And I'm getting closer to my own final chapter as each day goes by. And pretty soon, I have to sign up for Medicare or else. Do I still need to keep working? What if I fall and no one knows? What if I have another heart attack? Do I need a life alert? Right? And then, just a few weeks ago, literally a few weeks ago, the funniest thing happened. I was on one of my power walks, and a vivid childhood memory came absolutely out of nowhere and sounded exactly like this in my head. I will trust and not be afraid. It was one of the first Sunday school memory verses I had learned as a 3-year-old. I could even envision our teacher, Patty Ladd, with her arms waving around, directing our little class to repeat it together. I will trust and not be afraid. Totally back to basics and just what I needed to hear. Talk about childlike faith. So as I navigate from day to day, I'm grateful for the simple yet powerful reminder that was true at age 3, but even more true at age 64. Well, here's the full grown-up-y version of Isaiah 12:2. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. That verse has definitely been road tested now. All right, in conclusion, every person in this room has a story worthy of telling. Perhaps our time together tonight will give someone permission to honestly share theirs, or at least write it down. please know, this is not a game of can you top this? Absolutely not. The most important takeaway is for each one of us to see the thread of God's faithfulness in the exercise of sharing your story, no matter how great or how seemingly insignificant it is. I guarantee you'll see his thread. Life can be pretty messy and extremely hard to navigate. I was always told to journal, but excuse me, when? As I was writing this, I found myself reliving each event all over again and just sobbing. There was rarely time to do so when it was all happening because I always had to hold it together. Well, now, I don't have to hold it together anymore, and I've been letting loose anytime I feel like it. It's why I don't wear mascara, girls. Those tears, plus lots of laughter, are precious to me and quite healing. I don't know why God chose or allowed our family to go through so much. There's even more, actually, but that's for another time. I may never know, but I've certainly seen evidence of his hand continually in our lives, and that makes all the difference. I'm especially grateful for this forced assignment, thank you, Jeanette, because I now have a written primary historical document to pass along to my 4 grown kids, their spouses, and my dear grandkids, with a narrative of at least a portion of their family's legacy, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But more important, of their parents' and grandparents' firsthand account of God's faithfulness in their lives, and of our decision to continue to put our trust in him in spite of the circumstances. As Mike and I discovered years ago, there's no other viable option. The Apostle Peter said it best. Lord, where else would we go? Who else would we turn to? You alone have the words of eternal life. That's how he would say it. Eternal life. Could it be possible that we really don't have to say goodbye after all? Thank you all. Now I can cry really hard, huh? Oh, I got to turn this off. One more thing. It just occurred to me. All your lives and all your days are numbered too.